Okay, now that we've finished with the general patterns, now let's go in and do the specific patterns. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to create a new blended box map. This one is going to be 6-sided, and I'm going to give it a specific name, and I'll be using this to project textures onto the different sides of our dumpster. So there it is, creating the 6 different projections from the 6 different sides. And then I'm going to go in, I'm going to hit fit on each of these. So what that does is that's going to fit each one to the bounding box of the object. So we now have projections that are exactly fitted to the edges of our dumpster. Now I'm going to render out some templates, and the way I do this is, first of all, I take the lights in the scene and delete them. I then change the renderer and remove the area lights and skylights and shadows. And then there, for example, is a top render of the dumpster. And then I'm going to label this dumpster top template. Now I'm going to do the same thing by rendering the front view and all of the other views, and get myself 6 rendered templates with flat lighting for all of the different sides of my dumpster. So now I'm swapping to the back, right, and bottom view, doing the exact same thing. Now these are just rough templates for the moment. Later on I'm going to render some more detailed templates, and you'll see me doing that. But right now, I'm now in Photoshop, and I'm going to create the top template, and on top of it I'm putting a bunch of different groups for the rust, the graphics, the paint, and the dirt. And this is where we're going to be painting all of our different specific patterns. So then I copy and paste those onto the each of the 6 different templates I have. And here you can just see I'm getting rid of the black background with a transparent background, which you don't have to do, but I kind of like doing it. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to crop it to fit the exact size of the image, and that is going to match up approximately with the projections that I have set up inside of Max. And as I said before, I'm going to do some more, much more detailed versions of these later, but for now I just want something, a generally good start for the first set of layers that I'm going to do. Okay, there we go. So now I'm going to change these to be much larger size, about 4K each. And once again, as I said before, what I generally tend to do is I tend to have Photoshop files that are huge, like 4 to 8K. And then when I take a specific texture and bring it into Max, I'll generally bring in maybe a 2K or a 1K texture. And so if later on I figure out that I need a much larger texture, I can always go back and save out a larger version of it. And in the meantime, I'm not using up too much memory inside of Max. I'm only using up what I need to do what I'm actually doing. So you see here now I'm saving out each one. And let's start with the front. So I'm going to do the graphics first, and here's a graphic I got of a little man, the kind you see on like a bathroom. And there I put him into the dirt layer by accident, but I'll get him into the graphics layer in a minute. And this is the recycle icon, which I also got. So now I have the recycle icon and the little man icon on different layers. And I'm going to place them together. Notice there's no black background, even though they were on a black background before. I used various tools to extract them from the black background so that I have them on their own separate layer, and that's really important to have. So I've rotated it into place. And then what I just did there was I took the layer and I locked the transparency, and then I put a grayer color in using the fill tool. And what that does is that means the transparency will remain the same, but it will put a different color in. If I were just to use the fill tool just as in the color without doing that, it would fill the entire layer, not just the part of the layer that already has the people and the recycle icon in it. Now I've created a layer mask on there, and I'm using some of my grunge tools, grunge brushes, to add a little bit of paint wear. So there's another one. There's a much more hard edge tool that I'm using just to have little bits of the paint flake off. And it might be tough to see, but right now I'm seeing there was a little edge that came with my original image for some reason, a little white edge, and so I just deleted that so I don't have that anymore. So again, I'm just eating away at those edges just a little tiny bit just to make sure that it's not looking all perfect, because this paint was probably sitting there for a while. That's what my mask looks like. Now this is a scratch texture that I have, and the way I got the scratch texture was I got a piece of a board from an art store, which is called a scratch board. And what that is that is a black board that you can scrape away at to reveal white. And so all I did was I took the board and I started just scraping it on the ground and on the walls and anywhere I could to get some interesting scratches. And then I took that, scanned it, took the result into Photoshop, and I'm now pasting that into the layer mask on the graphics. And then I'm cloning, once again looking at the layer mask only, I'm cloning the scratches all over my image. And so what that'll do is everywhere where those scratches are, it'll eat away at anything that I put into the layer itself. So you can see how those scratches are eating away at the layer being the man and the recycle icon. So now I'm going to save a version of this as the graphics as a TIFF file. I'm going to save the transparency with it, which is vital to get the right result inside of Max. Now I'm going to go into my graphics blend box map, and I'm going to find... Oh, sorry, first of all, I'm going in and I'm going to change the mix curves on all of the different fall-off materials. The reason I'm doing that is just because I want it to be a more sharp fall-off. Because the object is pretty square already, it's okay to have a more sharp fall-off on the blend. So it's not a gradual blend, it's a much sharper blend. And this will just help the results be a little sharper, since for the graphic portion. Now I set the mono channel output to alpha and the alpha source to image alpha, and what that's going to do is that's going to use the alpha for our paint material. So I'm going to make a new material from the paint material called graphics, which is now another layer that I'm going to put in. Reduce the bump a little bit. Now we'll go back to here, and I'm going to put my paint material into a metal paint and also now the graphics layer. So all I'm doing is just layering a bunch of these different layers together as material. So now I have a graphics material, and inside the graphics material I place as the color my graphics color correct that contains the blend box map. And I make it a little shinier so that the graphics will be a little shinier than the regular paint, as though they were painted on with a different material afterwards. and then I grab not the color correct version, but the regular version, and drop it into the mix slot. So now I'm going to create some more graphics now that I've shown that it's working. And this, some people spend a lot of time on coming up with some really smart graphics. And if you're working in a big company for like a film, these graphics will usually have to go through some sort of lawyer process where they make sure that whatever the graphics say doesn't coincide with a company that already exists or something like that. For the cases of this, though, I'm just going to make some interesting letter and number combinations, just sort of the stuff that you'd imagine might be on the side of an object like this. And then I go in and, of course, muck up the edges by putting some dirt in the layer mask. And the reason why it's better to do this in the layer mask than it is to do this in the actual opacity of the layer itself is I can then go back and I can reveal or unreveal different parts. So it's more non-destructive when you have that mask in there. So now you remember I had those sort of warning stripe things that were on the truck, and so now I'm going to create the warning stripe graphics. So I selected an area, filled it with white or something close to white. Now I'm going to select parts to paste in with the red color. And there you go. And notice, of course, the lock transparency is on for that layer, and that's why the fill would only fill within the areas that were already non-transparent. So I'll do the same thing back here. Just changing its position a bit and then cleaning up the edges a little bit. These don't have to be exact. First of all, it's faster to do it this way, and second of all, this was probably would have been hand painted on a real object and with some sort of stencil, but it won't be perfect when they paint it on. And if you want something to look more realistic, part of the ways of making something look realistic in the computer is by making it look a little more handmade or a little bit imperfect. So doing these really quick masks like this without being too exact is actually a good way to not only be faster, but also a good way to make sure that your results end up looking more real. Just fixing up that little hole there and trying to get rid of that little edge. Then again, I take another one of my grunge brushes, which is the little sort of paint chipper type brush I use a lot to just roughen up those edges. So little bits of the graphics, the paint has sort of worn off as time went on. I do most of my grunge basically with two brushes. I use this one and I use the more sort of speckly one. And then most of the other stuff like the scratches is primarily using maps that I have. And instead of a brush to do it, it's just a map that I modify and then put into the mask of the layer. And then little paint chips here too. And I do lots of things like reduce or increase the opacity of the brush, just things to make sure that every area has a little of its own character. So here I'm looking at the reference I had, and just looking at how the paint chips off that and some of the other dirt and grime bits going on. And I use that for inspiration to do the graphics here. Also note, I have a dual monitor setup, so a lot of times I have my reference up on the second monitor, and I can stare at it and then stare back at my Photoshop document. And so right there, for example, I just pulled in from my second monitor the reference to see how it works with what I've been doing already. So just looking at it and deciding based on like the reference of the trucks I have, and just trying to balance out the colors so that there's a good number of graphics to give different details in different spots. If you had no graphics on the side of this thing, it would look really boring, as you saw previously, but with just enough graphics in the right place, it can really come to life. Because if you look at any sort of truck or garbage truck or tractor trailer, there's usually a lot of little signs, a lot of little stripes, all kinds of different graphic elements on the side. So after I use the type-in tool to type these graphics in, I usually collapse them into the single graphics layer I have, so they automatically inherit the scratches and everything that was in the mask of my original graphics layer. So here I'm just going to do something a little more logo-ish as opposed to just sort of random text. And just something I'm making up off the top of my head. M for mortuary. And I merge those together and transform them in the right spot. And then merge that down into the layer below. And now it's automatically inheriting the scratches and some of the other details that are in the mask. So now I'm going to chip away the edges a bit. And it's starting to look more interesting on the side now. And I decided to make another little square logo. Although I round the edges of the square just to make it look a little more high-tech. If it's a very square thing, that tends to be a little more industrial, but if you got the rounded edges, that makes it look a little more high-tech. And this is supposed to be the future, so it's very grimy and grungy like the real world, but at the same time I want it to look a little bit as though it's futuristic and robotic. You saw there I accidentally put the use my tool on the layer itself as opposed to on the layer mask, and that's why it did some weird stuff. So I just undid it and quickly went back and painted on the layer mask. And you can select the layer mask or the layer just by clicking on its little icon in the layers palette. I'm using Photoshop CS3 for this, but pretty much all the Photoshops at this point are very similar to each other, so I don't think I'm going to use any feature that's specific to this version of Photoshop. So I think CS2, CS1, or the newer CS4, it's all the same sort of thing. Okay, so I hide my background and I save this out as my front graphics again, so I can do a test in 3D. Again, save transparency, and there's a rendered result after I add a few more graphics here and there. So I then went in and I added graphics to all 6 different sides. You can see them in the different spots, and it immediately makes the guy look a lot more realistic. So now that I've done that, I decided now that I'm going to add the really small details, I really need some templates which are a lot more exact than the ones I had previously. So what I'm going to do is I render out giant 4K textures of all the sides. And remember, when you do this, you need to delete all the lights. So you're just using the default lighting, which will give you flat lighting on the surface. And the way I do that is I take that render. Then after that, I look at the map modifier gizmo, which is orange here. And I get it pretty close to the sides, and then I just print screen it into Photoshop. And then I crop it right along that orange border. So that's exactly what we would see from the mapping modifier. And then I take this image and I make them both the same size. And then I drag that guy into here. And then I proceed to start moving and resizing the layer until it matches up perfectly with the template below. At some point I might write a script or something to automate this process, but at least for the moment, this is, you'll see how to do the old-fashioned way. So now that's perfectly lined up, and you can now paint those small details because you have a nice 4K template. Okay, so now we're going to do the rust. So I pull the rust onto a layer, and I just quickly toss the rust all over the entire layer. Now keep in mind, this rust, what we're going to do for this rust is we're only going to produce a mask, which is going to blend between the rust material and all the other materials. The only reason I'm putting the rust color in here is because it'll give me a better preview in my 2D painting of what the final rust will look like. Otherwise, I would have to do only the mask in here and then do a lot of 3D tests to make sure it looks right. So once I have that rust layer, I then added a layer mask. I'm now taking that scratched up texture I showed you before using the scratch board, and I am adjusting it. I made a copy of itself, and I'm just trying to increase the number of scratches so there's a lot more scratches on top of each other. And I invert it. So the white areas will reveal the rust and the black areas won't. So I go into my layer mask for the rust and then I paste it in there. So again, as I said, everywhere that's white is going to show the rust and everywhere that's black is not going to show the rust. So the result of painting this in the layer mask is we're going to see a whole lot of little rusty scratches, which you can see right here. And I adjust the levels on the mask just a bit to try to get a little bit sharper transition for our scratches. There we go. Now I'm going to make several copies of this, and I just deleted the mask on that one. And this layer, I'm going to use my sort of speckly brush, and I'm just going to paint some random speckly spotted stuff, and then delete the parts that I don't want, so it's not evenly over the entire surface. So this is separate from the scratch layer, so I can control each layer separately. And I'll usually do a number of layers like this. So the bottom is going to be called scratches, and this one here, I'm going to duplicate it again and again. So now 4 different layers, which all have the same rust on it. Second layer I'm going to call spots, and that's where I'm going to paint all my spots. The third I'm calling edge, which is where I'm going to place rust around the edges, and the top one will be drips. So now in the spots one, let's add a few spots. And I have another brush which just adds sort of these randomly rotated splotches around and randomly sized splotches. And I'm going to use that to add a bunch of spots of rust to the image. And after I put the spots on, I'll use another brush to eat away at the first stuff by changing color. Just so nothing's ever perfect. Things, if you ever put anything in there, it's eaten away by something else, which it gives a very organic feel. So I'll, paint in white on the layer mask, and then I'll switch to black, and then I'll paint in with another brush to remove stuff from the first brush. Or I'll use the eraser and have the eraser with another brush, and that'll get rid of the little white spots with some black background in the layer mask. Now I'm going to do a drip, and here's a photograph I have of a drip on a wall. So I desaturate it and play with the levels on it. Then I take just the part of the drip that I want, and I invert it so it's white on black, copy it, and then paste it into the drip layer on the layer mask. And you can see the result when you look at it is there is the drip showing off the rust. But something's odd, and I figure out that when I pasted it, it accidentally pasted into the color of the rust and not just into the layer mask. So I fix that right here. That's much better. So I usually place the drips on places where stuff would naturally drip, and that's figuring out where those areas are. It's all about observation. Look at your reference, see where drips are coming from. Drips will come from edges, they'll come from places where water or maybe some oil will drip down, that kind of stuff. And those are the areas that will tend to get either darkening because of drips or eventually rust on metal and paint surfaces. So for example, I have this little round doohickey here, and it seems like a good spot to then drip a little bit of rust. And here's another one. This is an area that would turn, so I'm going to be sticking some rust on the drip area here too. So here's another way of doing some drips. I'm just taking a tool and one of the brushes, and now I'm going to do a motion blur on it. And there you have some real simple drips. I'll tend to use this for really small, simple drips, and then I'll use the texture method for the more involved drips. Again, playing with the clamping on the layer mask, just in that area. So here's another image which I have of drips, which used to be a photograph of real drips, and then I did some stuff to it. Same process I used to get the other drips. So now I paste it into the layer mask, and now you can see the result as I moved around in the layer mask on the full image. I decided to put some drips back here. That's the top of the container, so I figured that might be an area where you might have some, rain might hit the top of the dumpster, and then that rain would leak off the side and sort of roll down, and that would create some drips. And then again, here is the that original drip image that I had, and I'm going to use it to do the drips on the on this cylindrical object here. Sometimes it takes a couple times to to transform it just right to get the shape you're after. But using photos like this is a real nice way of speeding up your process and getting something more realistic right off the bat. Okay, cleaning up my workspace a bit. A few more little drips here and there. Okay, adding another little drip from a little panel, like maybe somehow some material or liquid from inside leaked out from these little panels. Or maybe water would go around the edges of the panels and then drip down the sides, which creates good areas for rust. At this point, you can probably really see how if the power of splitting stuff up into the general and the specific patterns is that you can do the best of both worlds. Because if you want to do these kind of specific patterns all over the place, like procedurally, it's certainly doable, but it would definitely take a lot of work. And I find it just much easier to paint those little details in. Whereas the stuff like the overall paint material or stuff you don't need, that doesn't need to be that specific, is much easier to do using a tileable texture, using a blended box map or a procedural or something like that. So here I'm just putting a few little scratches in over near the symbols. Trying to decide on the orientation. Sometimes I'll forget to change to be on the right layer. Like I should really be on the drip layer for this, but it happens. Few more scratches. Erase a few of them out. Adding just a little extra fortification to these drips, so they're not quite as bland as they were before. So I'm putting some scratches around where the drips are happening, just to make them a little stronger. And then just taking some of the drips and making sure they come to a bit of a finer point, rather than being sort of equi thick all the way along the lengths of them. Just removing some edges that are looking a little weird. Okay, now it's time for the edge. So for the edges, I now take that sort of paint chip thing I have, and I start going in, and just along the edges I add some little bits of rust, like the edge scraped off, and then the metal underneath was exposed to the elements, and so the metal then received some rust. I could have also done this procedurally, using the method which I showed to do the paint chips, or I could do this as well as that on top of each other. But for the rust, I'm only putting in a few places, so I'm just going to do it manually like this, rather than using some sort of procedural method for doing it. When we get to the paint chips, you'll see I'll be adding more paint chips, more specific paint chips on top of the procedural ones that I put in before. So here I'm just cleaning up the spots a little bit more. I felt there was just too much uniformity in the rust, and I wanted more areas with very little rust, or at least very few rust spots. So now I'm starting to feel good. I'm starting to feel like there's some areas that have a lot of rust. There's some areas that have only just a little bit of rust, and that's what you want to go for. Is you don't want to have it be the same everywhere. And in general, the areas that you want rust, you want some of them to be more random, but other ones you want to be very specific, and you want to say, okay, well, rust really would be there because this is an area that would receive water or dripping, or it's near an edge or something like that. By the way, once we have all these 4 different layers, we're going to merge them all together into one layer for bringing into Max. I'm just splitting them up here in Photoshop into the 4 different ones, so it reminds me of the 4 sort of basic types of rust. So now I take all 4 layers and I merge them into a single layer, and then I turn on the lock transparency and paint white, and then fill the background with black. And now this is going to be the layer that we're going to bring into Max to reveal the rust. So back into Max, I make a copy of the graphics blend. I call this Rust Blend, and then I'm going to go in and replace the graphics with Rust. Right now I'm just blanking out a bunch of the textures because I only have 1 Rust map right now, but I will have 6 for all 6 sides pretty soon. So here is the Rust blend, and I render it out, and you can see that it's shooting from the one side all the rust, and here's the result. So this is a 3D render, and you can see all the rust on the surface, which is starting to look pretty cool. And then here is all 6 different sides with rust on the robot character. So I use exactly the same steps to do the 6 different sides of the dumpster. Okay, now that we have our rust, it's time to move on. So I'm now going to do the paint wear, and the way I'm going to do that is similar to the rust. I'm going to create a layer which just has a single color in it, in this case sort of that grayish color, and then I'm going to put a mask, and the mask will be black, and then I'll start painting in white everywhere that I want there to be more chipped paint. So like the rust layer, there's no reason I have the gray color here. We're not actually going to use this gray color in the final 3D model. We're just using it as a way to sort of preview in Photoshop what it would look like to add this extra paint chipping. And then we're going to take the layer mask itself, and we're going to use that inside of Max as the way to blend between the areas that are showing the metal material and the areas that are showing the paint material. So for the paint wear, I go in and I'm mostly going to do stuff around the edges. And again, I take my good friend, the Scratch map that I have. You'll see that I tend to use this a lot. And feel free if you think that you might end up getting repetitive using this map again and again. Feel free to go in and get a bunch of scratch boards and make a bunch of different maps. That can also add variety to your image. But in this case, I'm just going to use the same one again. since the scratches are really a very small detail that it helps out the overall look, but it's not the main focus. So the chances of anyone noticing you're using the same map over and over again is pretty low. Just getting rid of some tiling problems here, some details. Duplicate it, and then I paste in the graphic, but it needs to be inverted so that the white areas show the paint. Sorry, the white areas show the metal under the paint. Okay, and there you go. So now we have scratches, all kinds of scratches to the paint, revealing the metal underneath. But of course that's way too many scratches and look really unrealistic, so I'm going in and I'm painting on top of it with one of my dirt brushes black to get rid of some of the white scratches. Here I'm just using a cloner to quickly clone some of the scratches in areas that I need it. Then go back in and start painting away scratches again. That's starting to look better. So it adds some extra details without overpowering the image. So now on my edge layer again, I use my sort of paint chippy type brush to add some more stuff just around the edges. And again, you want to add it a bunch of different places, but not so much of it that it becomes even over the entire surface. That's the problem of the procedural one I did, was that it was pretty even over the entire surface. And so if I'd left that without adding any manually painted stuff, it would look kind of bland. But by painting in some larger chunks of metal, some larger paint chips, when the person looks at it, they're going to start, they're not even going to notice that there's the proceduralness of the first pass, because it's being enhanced by adding the manually painted stuff over top. Areas right around screws and bolts are also really great places to add details like little bits of rust or little bits of dirt or places where paint will chip off. So you can see already, I've added a bunch of stuff down to the lower left, and it's making it look distinctively different than the upper right. So when I add more stuff to the upper right, which I'm going to need to do, I don't want to add so much that it ends up looking similar to the lower left. And sometimes with this tool you'll get edges at the end of the tool, at the end of the stroke, you'll get stuff which looks a little ugly, and you want to go in and just taper off the edge a bit by erasing it. I'm always zooming out just to make sure that it is looking good. Okay, so now we're going to bring this into max. I again merge all the layers together. I then set the transparency, lock the transparency, put white in there, make a black background. Then save that as a new TIFF, which is the front paintwork. So now I create my paintwear mask, which is going to take that texture. And then under the paint mask, I'm going to add another layer here. So the underneath layer is the vertex color layer, and then the on top layer is the paintwear layer that I've painted. So the two of them are going to sit on top of each other. so that both will affect the placement of the paint and the placement of the metal. So again, I'm just blanking out the ones I don't have, but later on I'm going to have ones in there as I paint the paint layer on the other 6 sides of the object. So we'll take a look at the warp texture version. There it is. And then if we do this one, which is sitting on top, you see that's the more specific stuff. There. Now I'm going to invert it so that they're both black on white. And there's the inverted version. Except it's doing something odd. And I'm not quite sure why it chose that color. So I decided the easiest way to solve it, rather than trying to solve it in Max and doing an invert and everything, is to go into Photoshop and do the inversion there. So when I merge the layer down and then do the transparency, I'll make that black, and then make the background white. And so I grab the new map. Now there it is, the black and white specific map along with the black and white procedural one, and then I do a multiply. So the two maps together form the combination of the specific stuff you painted and the more general procedural. So now when you render it, you see it's merging both together. So there's lots of areas with the painted parts and areas with the more procedural stuff. So I felt there's still a few more places that it would be nice to get a little bit of paint wear, so I'm going to go in one more time and add a few bits and pieces. Overall, I felt that a lot of what I had painted specifically was just too small, and I needed some bigger corners with some stuff removed. This was looking good on right angle corners. When you have a corner like this, which is not a 90-degree angle, but like a 45, that tends to look really nice when you wear paint off. And these are spots where paint would naturally wear off from bumping into things, or areas where liquids will pool, or you know, it's also areas where people will grab and manipulate, which leads to wear and tear. More scratches here and there. And here we go. So I just brought them quickly into the RAM player, and you can see the difference between the first and the second image. So the second image is looking a lot nicer now. Okay, so now it is time to do the dirt. And the dirt on the images I've seen tends to be at the lower portion, because it's dirt that's splashing mostly from the ground up onto the surface of the object. So I just took a bit of this photo, and now I'm cloning it into a straight texture. In this case, I'm just using one of my dirt brushes instead of one of my cloners to do it, but desaturated it, playing with the levels. Doing a little more work just to get rid of some of the obvious brush strokes. So I select everything on that channel, make a new layer, and then hit paste. Sorry, I hit fill to put in white in those areas, so now I have white on transparent. And that's a good way of grabbing stuff, which is from a black and white map and making it onto a separate layer. Is you can take your black and white map, go into the channels, grab like the red channel, say, control click it, and that'll select that channel, and then you go back onto a new layer and paste onto that new layer a color using fill. So for example, filling it with white, and then you'll have white on transparent instead of having white on black. Or in this case, I have now this sort of brownish, yellowish color, which I painted, which I used to fill. So now you're seeing I'm placing the dirt primarily at the bottom, where it would splash up from the ground. Also, when it comes to the design of this character, this dumpster is meant to be detached from the robot. So you could imagine there might be more dirt crawling up here because it might be, for example, sitting on the ground at some point while the robot is off doing something, and it comes back later and grabs it. So just to keep in mind, this dirt is not, the dumpster is not always floating up above the ground somewhere. Chances are it's probably on the ground sometimes. So now I'm just trying to, once again, make sure it's not even dirt everywhere by erasing some of the dirt. Erasing more of it from up above and less on below. And you'll note that the way I'm erasing it is by going into the layer mask and erasing it. So the dirt is still there, and if I ever need to get more of it in, I can just paint white into the mask instead of black. But right now I'm just painting black, so I get rid of a lot of the dirt. So the dirt's a little more subtle. Okay, now as well as the splashes, I'm now going to do a few little drips, which is a very similar process to the rust drips. But in this case, you'll note that for the rust, I was only going to use the mask to blend between the rust color, which is already in max, and the stuff underneath. In the case of the dirt, like the graphics, I'm going to use the actual color from Photoshop as well as the mask to place the dirt. And the reason is because it's nice to use a bunch of different colors of dirt, and more specific colors of dirt in various spots. So I just feel it's easier to control that in Photoshop than to, whereas rust is something that's a little bit more general. Although feel free, if you want, instead of using this technique for the rust, you could take the rust and you could paint it in with very specific colors and then use those colors in the same way that I'm doing the dirt. It's just whatever you prefer to do, whatever you think is going to look better. In this case, because the rust is not a huge deal, I just used a blended box map for the rust color, and then I'm just revealing it. Whereas the dirt, I want to have more control over specific colors of dirt, like right here. You see me changing colors in specific spots on the model. Again, like the rest, I'm sort of picking spots where I feel that some dirt might be dripping out, like around screws and these big joints that are up here on the top of the dumpster. You can imagine some nasty stuff getting in there and then dripping out of the top a bit, and that would create not only rust but also some dirt. Sometimes I'll paint the stuff zoomed way in, but other times I'll do it zoomed out a bit, just so I'm seeing more the overall look of the dirt rather than just the specific little tiny bit of dirt that I'm putting somewhere. And that can help get some, it's all about the whole. It's not about the specific piece of dirt. No one's going to be staring at one specific piece of dirt, but people will be staring at how the dirt overall looks on the surface. And so that's really the most important part, is if it feels like the dirt is in the right area, then the dirt is in the right area, and the specific little pieces are just contributing to the whole. But the specific pieces themselves are just not that important. Okay, so I'm getting pretty close now with the dirt. Just adds a little bit of extra stuff in there. So I take all the different layers, and I save those as a TIFF with transparency again for the dirt. Now in Max, I do the same thing I did with the graphics. So I'm going to take a blended box map that I have, and I'm going to replace the innards of it with the dirt instead of whatever was there before. There's a color correct. And there you go. So now we're going to move on to the dirt, which I'm going to put on the metal. I'm not going to put any rust on the metal. I've decided I want the actual robot to look like it's a little newer. I mean, it can still have dirt on it because things get dirt as they get used, but I wanted the dumpster part to look more messed up and rusty, and so the only pass I'm going to do on the metal part is the dirt pass. So I started out with rendering a template, just like I did before. And again, you'll get more dirt on the bottom and less on the top. And I put a little less dirt in the middle of the wheel, simply because those are going to be spinning all the time, so I can imagine less dirt might cake up on that and more dirt might cake up on the non-spinning parts. And so now I'm doing my drips layer and my edge layer and a smudge layer, just for good measure. So I'm picking a color and doing some stuff around the edges. Now the dirt on this is probably going to be a little bit more noticeable than the dirt on the dumpster. And number one, that's because the dirt on the dumpster, the color of the dirt was more similar to the color of the dumpster, and here the color is a lot lighter on the surface of the metal. Also, it'll be more visible simply because the metal is more reflective, and the dirt will not be reflective, so you'll really see it a lot stronger. And also, it's the only pass of grunge I'm going to have on this surface. So I might as well go a little bit further with it just so it's more obvious. Sometimes subtlety is good, and sometimes knocking it home is the way to do it. And it really just depends what you're looking for and what looks the best. So I'm changing colors a bunch, and I'm spending a lot of time adding dirt around the screws which are holding stuff together, and all the little nooks and crannies. And again, this kind of dirt you could have done in a number of ways. You could have done a procedural version as well, maybe using ambient occlusion to say where your dirt goes. But in this case, I prefer to do the painted method, but it's totally up to you, whatever you think is going to look the best. Make sure you don't put so much dirt everywhere that it covers everything. Like, you'll notice I'll skip a bunch of screws. And if you look at the reference photos that I had before, you'll see areas with more or less dirt. And it's just avoiding uniformity is one of the #1 things that you really want to do when you're doing this process. You want to avoid the same detail appearing again and again and again, because that looks computery, which is why this hand painting can work nicely to add some little cool extra details. Now, some of the smaller drips I'm going to do just by painting them in, like this. And then in a minute, I'm going to go and do some texture drips using a photograph that I had of drips. Okay, here's the photograph, and here's some good drips. So do a desaturate and do a levels to extract the drips from the concrete background, and do a little hand painting to get rid of it a little more. I'm just going to add a little bit of motion blur to these just to make them a little softer. They were looking a little too hard for the kind of drips that I want for this image. So again, I grabbed the channel and made a new layer and then filled that layer. And now I have the drips on a transparent background, which I drop into the dirt part of my PSD file. Use the clone tool to clone some of the drips. And then I'm deleting the parts of the drips that are on the wheel. Since the wheel is turning, I wouldn't expect there to be a lot of drips on the wheel, or if there were drips, they would kind of be shooting in all directions, because the wheel is never at the exact same rotation for a long period of time. Unless it had been sitting there non-moving for thousands of years. But I want to make sure that it appears like this thing has been busy for a while. So it really is, when you're trying to do a story, a lot of it also comes from things like textures, because textures can totally tell the story of something in sometimes as good as talking or any number of other things in a film. So just by doing the textures a certain way, you can kind of hint at what the object has been used for, how it's been used, how long it's been used, any number of other factors. Okay, so here's my personal friend, the scratch texture again. And I'm duplicating it a bunch of times to make it a stronger texture, and then drop it on top. Then I'm going to use the clone brush to clone that texture into a number of spots. And there it is with and without dirt. Okay, so after that I did more dirt for the rest of the metal parts, but now I'm going to move on to our street. So here's a photo I took of some of the lines you'd see on the side of the street. So the first thing I want to do is I want to extract the line from these photos. So I took the two photos, put them side by side. Now I want to extract them from the street, which first thing I'm going to do is the high pass filter. I look at it and I'm like, this really isn't going to do what I need it to do. So I'll have to do a more manual method. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sample colors and get only the white, make a new layer, and then paste in a whitish color using that selection. And the results there are okay. You see now we have the white on a black surface. So now I go in and manually paint out the bits of the road that came in with the line. Again, there are all kinds of ways of going about doing this, but this is just the one that seemed to work for me at the time. And there's probably much smarter ways of doing this automatically, but when you're painting, you kind of just have to go with what seems to work at the time. Then again, this is a short deal to remove this. If it's a situation where it's something that will take you a lot of manual labor to do, that's the areas where you should really stop and say, okay, what is there a more procedural method, a more automated method I could use to extract it? But in this case, it's pretty simple just to do it by hand, so I'm not going to worry about trying to come up with something smarter. And we're done. So I now have the line separated from the background. And I'm going to use liquefy to try nudging the line back into place. And I can kind of do it. It's a little bit jittery, but that definitely looks better than it did before. Trying to match up the two pretty well. So now I take that layer, and I do a few more adjustments to it. So what I'm doing here is I'm just making a template of what a straight line would look like, bring the opacity down just so I have some idea of what a straight line is. And then I'm going to use that to warp this line into that shape. So I could continue using the liquefy tool, or I'm going to use just the warp tool in this case to do it. I really like the liquefy tool, but I really wish that it didn't have its own sort of separate interface for working inside of Photoshop. It would be really much more useful if it worked directly in the regular Photoshop interface. So hopefully they'll do that at some point. In the meantime, I'll just use the warp transform here. So that's much straighter than the previous one was. Now we have this little edge part here. I'm going to just paint it away. Probably get away with something pretty rough. Again, it's all about knowing how close you're going to get to something, where you're going to see it from, so you only have to do the work that you really have to do, rather than making everything 100% perfect. Because while it would be nice to do everything 100% perfect, there generally isn't time. we go. So that was it was easier to patch in a part of the other part of the line onto onto the old line in order to get rid of that seam there. Merge those two together, and then use a cloner. Okay, that's looking pretty good. Get rid of the other seam. Okay, thinking maybe trying the high pass filter again, but I don't think I'm going to worry about it. So I'm just going to drop it in here. Now you'll notice there's a black outline here, and that's because when I was trying to get rid of the background, I accidentally painted in black rather than using an eraser to paint out. So it was a silly mistake, but you know, you're bound to make mistakes here and again. So what I do instead is I try to get rid of the black by doing a color range, selecting it, and then deleting it. And there you go. So the black's gone, and now we just have the white. And I duplicate it and drag it, and now I have a white line that's the right shape and placement for our road. Now here's the road. I'm just taking a peek at it and seeing some of the other details that are on there, and there's some sort of wear marks where the various tires and whatnot have moved. So I'm going to go in and add some of those details too. So just with a dirt brush, I'm going to do some darker areas where maybe car tires have been before. I'm going to do a little motion blur just to blur it a bit. And I'm going to set the layer to overlay, and that means that areas that are black are going to darken and areas that are white on the layer are going to be brighter. And that seems to be getting pretty close to what I want, at least for the general feel of it. Now on another layer, I'm going to do some more just painting in with a little bit of dirt, just to get a little variety. And then erasing out after I've painted something in. And then a really faint brush just to do some black speckles, just a few of them here and there. See a few there. And there you go. So just taking a peek at the reference again. Add a few last details. And then this is another layer of scanned dirt that I had from some previous project. And I'm just going to bring this in on top to add one last little detail. Just a few more little tiny splotches of dirt here and there. So add in the extra stuff and set it to multiply and bring the opacity down. And decide, how about one more? You never have too many layers of dirt. This is going to be white stuff, though, as opposed to the black, more darker dirt before. And just group it together. Now I have the sidewalk as well as the gutter, and this I'm not going to spend as much time on as the road, customizing it, but I'm going to add a little bit of extra dirt there because I think it needs it. But again, if this was a more major focus of the final piece, I would probably spend a lot more time getting more details in there. But really, this is all about the robot, and the background is just a little spot for him to sit on as sort of a test or a temporary spot. Just flip the dirt horizontal so it's not exactly the same as the other one. And now here is the final result. So you can see all the extra detail that adds.